Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on preventing winter slips, trips, and falls. Yes, you can prevent these incidents from happening to your staff with some work and pre-planning. Also, by eliminating these common sites and these as well, we can do better. True, we may not be able to prevent every fall, but there are many things you can do to control winter hazards. My name is Chris Caden, and I'm joined today by my esteemed colleague, Derek Thyssen. We are loss control consultants for West Bend Mutual Insurance Argent. Today, we're going to outline steps to help you control hazards associated with snow and ice. Our primary goal is to keep your number one resource, your extremely valuable employees, safe from snow and ice hazards. After the session today, you'll be able to develop a plan for your facility. We'll help you understand the importance of documented routine inspections during winter, especially during snow and ice events when they're occurring. Help you select appropriate de-icing agents. There are many differences and they can be very expensive, especially with today's prices and market conditions. It's really important to buy and utilize the correct product whenever you can. And lastly, we want to identify and treat at least 3 other winter-related hazards that you may experience. If you have any questions during this presentation, please post them in the comment section in the right-hand box below. We will get to your questions at the end of the presentation. And also, handouts are available at the right-hand side of your screen for download. If you have any issues, please let us know. Snow removal. It's never too early to plan, only too late. Here in Nebraska and Wisconsin, we have already had a snow. A reminder that that we are entering snow season. The important thing to remember about planning is to communicate your plan so that everyone in your facility understands your expectations before winter starts. Sorry, we seem to be having some audio difficulties. Hopefully that's better. Before winter starts, we want to clearly establish your snow removal expectations in a written plan. We want to determine if your organization will or if you'll be contracting out the snow removal or both. It'll be a combination. You'll do some, your vendor will do some. What is going to be your process? And that's really important to know so that you can appropriately budget your expenses. Snow removal can be very expensive if you sub out the work. And if you decide that you want to contract the work yourself, it can be a very expensive capital investment in equipment. It could take a year or 2 or more to be able to finance that equipment or even obtain the equipment. So it's really important to make sure you're planning these things months ahead and not now when we're approaching winter weather season and all these resources can be very difficult to obtain. And also, we want to remind you that there are free resources out there, such as Argent's website here, which, please contact your loss control consultant. We can help you with this, or type it into your Google search engine, and you can order any resources that we offer for winter weather when it comes to window clings, posters, and stickers for ice melt containers. All those items are available at no cost to you on our website. It's a great resource. So let's try to refrain from using these methods. While they are very creative, we can do better. For your snow removal plan, many of you prepare for winter weather with your maintenance team, and maybe you make sure you have ice melt and your shovels are in good working order, your equipment's up and running, but you specify your snow removal expectations not only with your vendor but with your maintenance team. What level of cleanliness are you anticipating reaching? What activities should begin and when? Is it After 6 inches of snow has fallen, does your snow vendor come to treat your lot? When are they going to be there? When can you expect them? Applications of salt and sand, are these things included in your contract? We love to have a map showing your priority areas. How are these areas to be cleaned, whether it's a plow, shovel, or a broom? What about where the snow is piled? It's so important to know where that snow is going to melt, because you can anticipate additional hazards down the road and try and prevent those from happening just by placing your snow further away from that area. And then utilizing a snow removal log. This is a tool that we have some examples of later on that can be very helpful should someone, whether it be a visitor or a family member or a guest or whoever it may be, if they should sustain a fall at your facility, can you go back and prove what efforts were made and when they were made? Here's an example of a snowplow map. It's a great resource to maintain your plan and expectations should your maintenance director leave or your snow vendor change. And really what this is about is providing consistent communication and expectations when there are changes. We really like to have these things in place so that if someone new comes along and they've never had these types of responsibilities in the past, now we can plug them in, we can show them these resources, help them understand the expectations and where to put the snow, how to do the snow. It can be a really helpful tool for communicating those expectations. Here's a Google map of your property. If for example, you don't have any maps of your facility, the one thing that I do want to point out about this is this map can be a little bit deceiving. This particular property is on a very large hill and has numerous sloped sidewalks and walkways to treat. Several high priority areas are now in need of treatment and clearing. So if possible, we would want to push the snow downhill to avoid melting through those parking stalls and walking areas above. And again, addressing these items before the snow flies, it helps keep your team safe and everybody on the same page as far as what the expectations are. Before winter, we want to establish our expectations. You can walk through the lot with your staff or your contractor or both, identify snow removal methods for each area. Some areas may require a different level of treatment. Some you may only be able to access with a shovel. The snow pile locations, again, we just talked about how important it is. It can help you to prevent issues down the road just by locating the snow in a certain area. Document existing damage. If you have any damage or if you have any areas of concern that you're wanting to monitor, should the snowplow cause any damage to that down the road, how can you work that out with your contractor? Emergency exits, fire hydrants, transformers, all those types of things. It's really nice if you can label those items. A lot of times when I go to facilities, I'll see a large marker placed on top of a hydrant or a transformer, just so that if there is a large snow, that those items are marked and seen even during that snow period. Look for ad hoc paths. That's where people are walking where they're not supposed to be. We'll talk more about that later. So you've identified your priority areas before snow fell. Once those areas are cleared, begin secondary areas, which I know this may sound like basic common sense, but when it comes to work comp and training new people, there just is no common sense, right? We have to treat folks like they don't know these things exist or how they occur, because you can't take for granted that they know. So it may seem like, oh, this is just basic common knowledge, but for some folks, they've never done this before and they won't know. Clear down to the pavement whenever possible. I know that's not always going to be possible, especially depending on your area. Go back and ensure your handicap parking, fire hydrants, etc. areas are clear later. Any damage, you need to have that reported immediately, especially if you have a contractor. They want to know, because if they're a good contractor, they're going to want to make it right. What we don't want to see is the footprints in the snow as noted by the red arrows to the left. Several trips have been made to this dumpster. And really, the thing that frustrates me is, what does this say to your staff that are taking the trash out to these dumpster locations? Is their safety not important to you? Are they not important to you? You know, I feel like we can send a better message and do a better job of clearing some areas like that. When to plow, again, this may seem like common sense, but it's really important when it comes to clearing snow that your largest exposures are typically at change of shift, when you tend to have the most foot traffic in and out of the building. The, the more clear the walkways are to the building, then the less debris and hazard staff may encounter when leaving the same hallways. So it's important. We want to try and get there at the beginning of shifts whenever possible, whether that's mornings or afternoons or even evening shifts. Try and get there between, half hour or so before that shift begins, so that we can treat those areas and ensure that our staff have safe access. What's the amount of snow slush that you're willing to accept? Some places say, we treat when we see footprints in the snow. And as you can see in this photo, there's numerous footprints in the snow after an overnight dusting, which is disappointing because this facility did not clear their sidewalks prior to the day shift's arrival. Remember to come back to remove snow that was between vehicles or otherwise inaccessible when initial clearing was done. And the big thing to take away is that any accumulation can be hazardous, and it's really hard to put an accumulation amount on, as a figure of, we need to start plowing at this number. The traditional thought is that when you see footprints in the snow, that's probably the time to start doing some treating so that we can eliminate those prints and get down to pavement. Snow pile placement, again, this is up to the property owner, not the plow driver. And this could take a little finagling, especially in a situation like this where you have an entry area that has a common ground next to it, which is next to the building. The snow has been placed in that area, which is going to melt across the sidewalk and create additional hazards, not to mention the large icicles hanging down from above. Looks like there could be some roof issues going on in this scenario as well. The important thing here is, what efforts can we make to remove that snow and not even put the snow in that area to begin with? Can we blow it out into the parking lot where we can get a snow plow to push it away from the building and away from that area? That'll just keep that area more dry and safe for our visitors and our staff. How clean is clean enough? Well, obviously, we'd love to seek bare surfaces whenever possible. Any visible amount of snow, slush, or ice is a hazard. Don't assume people will see the hazard. We have these great little devices that we love to carry with us in our hands that, communicate to the world everything that we do every day. So when we're looking at those and we're not focused to what we're doing and paying attention, boom, it's really easy to have a slip and fall. If you or your contractor cannot get the surface that clean, then there's a problem, right? And so on these two pictures, you see the two lots are in the same town, minutes apart. The owner lot on the right said they could not find someone who would remove snow to bare pavement. And then when you look at the lot to the left, somehow they were able to find a vendor to help them. Real life trash tragedy. An employee was taking the trash to the dumpster during a snowstorm. Red flag number one, right? Snowplow efforts were stopped due to the amount of snow. The employee twisted their ankle when they were stepping off the sidewalk, breaking the ankle and requiring surgery. Ouch, that does not sound like fun. So the thing that I'd like to point out, aside from the cost of this claim of $54,000, the amount of pain that this individual had to go through, these things could have been prevented. Like this example in this photograph, we have a dumpster that's placed on the outside of a hallway across from the dining services. And this was just a temporary setup to allow for staff to put trash in this waste bin so that it could be taken out to the main bin later on when there wasn't a snow event occurring. So I think some Additional preventative measures would be to remind staff that dumping trash can wait until after the storm. We can pre-plan your waste vendor to move bins closer to the building during winter months. And also communicate with staff when snow treatments have paused so that they can be prepared for the conditions when they leave, if they get to leave, right? Sidewalks near curbs. Again, we want to ensure that someone takes responsibility for this area. If possible, have someone pushing snow from the sidewalks into the street or driving surface so that the plow can come by and then push that snow away and pile it in a different part of the parking lot whenever possible, right? Unfortunately, curbs can create extra hazards, from stepping down, and where this red squiggly line is, it's hard to notate, where the curb ends and excuse me, where the walking surface begins. So anything that we can do, the yellow paint helps, but clearing that snow off of that walkway is a great way to remove that hazard. We have another great example here, our tragic truck topple. A truck driver returned to his terminal after his route. When exiting the cab, the driver stepped down to the snow ice covered lot and slipped and fell. This resulted in a brain hemorrhage and injuries to his hip and shoulder. And this is a really big one, $478,000. I don't know about you, but I feel like we could buy quite a bit of ice melt and snow removal equipment for almost $500,000. Thankfully, he survived those injuries, but he was in rehabilitation for a long time. What a tragic incident. Preventive measures for parking between cars, whenever possible, trying to move the cars, establishing some type of ice melt station so drivers can lay salt in between their vehicles. The photo to the left there is a sample of an ice melt shaking container that we have. It's quite large. I think it holds about 40 ounces of ice melt product. And, that's a great resource to have that staff can carry with them and be able to put enough ice melt between vehicles so that it makes a difference. Because remember, ice melt isn't going to work instantaneously, right? It's really down the road so that when they come back and park in that same location or someone else does, that area has been able to melt. So we also, if possible, would like to provide traction aids for those individuals if we know it's going to be difficult, if it's just a really tough area that doesn't get any direct sunlight and it's always super cold and hard to melt that snow. There's other tools that we can provide to help those staff be safe in that situation. Traffic control, again, our goal is no accumulation between the cars. And I know that's not always easy, but is there a way to rotate the cars? Do we have someone that can assist with that process? Can you set up different staging areas, if you will? Day shift will park here, night shift will park here. I've been to facilities where they actually have like an ABC coding to their parking lots, and depending on a snow event, you'll be told to park over in lot C or lot B. And then at the next time, the next shift will park in this location. Just different ways to rotate those cars so that we're not always parking in the same spots, because as we all know, as the snow builds up, it just gets harder and harder to remove the thicker that snow and ice gets compacted into the ground. Contracting your snow removal, some people just don't want to assess that risk of their own and they don't have the manpower, and that's great. It's really important that if you do contract, to make sure you obtain a contract with the snow vendor. You may need to talk to several vendors to find the one that's willing to do the job the way that you want it done and who's willing to put these items in writing for you. Because, Cousin Joe down the street may be a great family member, but is he going to be reliable when it comes to needing your lots and sidewalks treated? This is a sample of a contract and a reminder to read your contract carefully. This is a very detailed contract that removes almost all liability from the contractor. And it's really important that you protect your facility and obtain copies of current insurance coverage and verify that it's still in place every year. It never fails. It seems like almost every year when after snow events have occurred, and I talk to some of my businesses that I work with, I'll hear stories of how, well, so and so was a new startup, and we gave him a shot, and he did a good job. He unfortunately scraped the side of one of our vehicles, and that's when we learned he didn't have the insurance coverage. So again, it's important to protect yourself, be proactive, make sure those insurance coverages are in place and up to date. Sidewalks. Remove snow and ice accumulations as soon as possible, right? And again, it would be super great. And in an insurance utopia, we'd have people assigned to scout or round on our entry areas and inspect the conditions of those locations, especially if they're really highly trafficked. But I know that that's not always reasonable or possible. But if there's, a way to incorporate at least periodic checks of those areas and having a log to sign off that so-and-so checked it, it was dry, or so-and-so checked it and they needed to change some mats out. Because how do you know if an area needs treatment, or how do you know that your efforts to contain and remove the snow are working if someone's not checking on it? You want to have someone assigned to keep ahead of the problem during snow and blowing snow events. Apply ice melt as necessary, obviously, whenever possible. During snow events, clearly we have shovels, snow blowers, and power brooms to help us in those efforts. Shoveling can be a very physically demanding job. Is your crew in good physical condition? Do they perform warm-ups prior to removing snow? There's many heart attacks occurring every year during the first snowfall, especially if it's a heavy, wet snow, which we tend to see in the fall. We want to make sure your crews are aware and reminded not to overexert themselves. Yes, we want the snow cleared, but it's not at the expense of one of your staff. They're too valuable. Snowblowing, it's a less physically demanding job, right? The biggest thing with snowblowing is just making sure that the operator is trained on the machine. Have they ever used one before? And don't be afraid to ask. Go through the setup, how the machine works, how to direct the discharge, the chute, which way should it turn? There's probably going to be a certain pattern that your facility uses with snowblower. And if you're turning the chute into that northwest wind, that snow is not going to blow very far, and it's going to make you pretty cold pretty quick. So again, don't assume that they know how to use it. Make sure that they do know and that they're comfortable with it. Power brooms are awesome pieces of equipment. They can handle most of your light and medium snows, and they really excel on uneven surfaces. And let's face it, with how expensive concrete is these days, we're keeping our sidewalks in place longer and longer and just trying to get by with them as long as we can. And they can be very irregular, and power brooms do a great job of working on those surfaces. Heated mats, these can be very expensive upfront costs, and not every facility is going to be able to afford these. But I just want to point out that they do have a great usage, and they're very effective. If you have problem areas, for example, maybe you have an upper level surface, and below it is a main entry exit door that staff or someone utilizes, and snow and ice from above is melting to that area down below, and you can't seem to get a handle on it because it doesn't get any direct sunlight. Maybe a heated mat will help you. I also work with a facility that installed the mats on stairs, and it was great. Ice control guidelines. Controlling ice offers numerous challenges. Temperature, surface type, overall weather conditions can negatively impact your efforts, right? We've seen it time and time again. And unfortunately, pre-applying can be such a challenge, especially when the weather forecasting can be so far off. So Whenever possible, we'd like to pre-wet utilizing de-icing materials to increase the effectiveness, because a little bit of product can go a long way. And I think we have another slide on that. This is just a reminder that there are many products at various price points specific to some of the above temperature ranges. And really for this, the thing that I just want to remind you is check the labels to see what products you're using. Many are combinations of some kind of salt with either a magnesium or calcium chloride. So it's really important to keep those SDS cards and information about that product on hand, should there be any kind of unintended exposure. Oh yeah, this is the anti-icing I was referring to. Pre-treating snow and ice can help reduce buildup and make it easier to remove snow. And I'm sure many of you have seen some of those brine trucks out spraying the roads and turning everything white. There's salt brines, there's beet juice, there's byproducts of alcohol production. Those are all examples of liquid pre-treatment products, and there's many of them out there. Feel free to shoot me an email. There's a couple of products that are made here in Nebraska that I think are really quality products. They work really well. But yeah, many state and county road departments will pre-treat with salt brines. That's why we see that white powdery residue. And really the biggest thing, even if it doesn't fully, if it's a pure snow event, that can help make that first layer easier to remove down to that bare pavement, which is what we're striving to achieve, right? We also want to make sure we have the right equipment when we're applying pre-treatment products. Keep in mind, not only are there push behind, there's sprayers that you can put on ATVs, even vehicles, and also handheld sprayers that maintenance folks can carry around or wear on their backs. All right, so Derek, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone. I have the pleasure of rounding out this webinar today, and we're going to start with another real-life fracture failure. These scenarios that we've described are actual real-life claims that have occurred to West Bend insureds over the years, and obviously keeping the name of the employee and the companies private, but offering up some good tips and examples of what can go wrong. And in this scenario, we have a parking area that wasn't cleared overnight, and the inspection of that lot wasn't completed either. And so without that inspection, of course, the snow removal vendor couldn't be notified to remove the snow. And as an employee came in to start their shift, they exited their vehicle and unfortunately fell and severely fracturing their ankle, resulting in a claim for $123,000. And as Chris pointed out, this is just the cost of that claim. We're not taking into consideration the pain that comes with it and the rehabilitation, recovery, and of course, time away from their coworkers. So another nasty injury from, again, something that could have been prevented. And what could have helped this one? Well, a snow removal inspection log. What we're talking about here is essentially a documented form where you appoint different employees within your organization to monitor the conditions during winter weather events. They want to complete this log as they're performing any snow removal duties, whether it be shoveling walkways, plowing parking lots, or de-icing different areas of the property. This should all be documented on this form. It's your due diligence as an employer to show that, hey, we are doing the right thing. We're not turning a blind eye to the snow or ice exposure, and we are going to take steps to address it. Obviously, the duration or how often or how frequent we inspect our logs is going to depend on the snow events. But as a general rule of thumb, anytime we have snow falling, once an hour would likely be appropriate. And obviously, the big times of day that are going to have an impact and when we want to inspect is before and after that shift change. And you can think about it, it makes sense. The scenario that we just described, an employee shows up to work, if it would have been identified as the lot not having snow removed and ice melt laid, then this would have been something that may have been prevented. So again, through that inspection log, we can not only identify when things need to be done, but we can also document it. And just to give you an example of what these logs look like, we have an example right here. This is something that you can also obtain through www.wbconnect.com, where a lot of these resources we've gone through, along with our winter slip trip fall prevention website, which Chris posted the link, and I'll post it here at the end as well. But this, again, getting back to the log, tells you who the driver and employees' names are that are performing the inspection, the date, time that they were there performing their inspection and removal, the weather conditions, and so on and so forth. So again, something you definitely want to implement if not already in place at your organization. There are additional winter slip fall related matters that, again, that we need to go over, just so everybody is aware that it doesn't all just start with snow removal and end with snow removal. We also need to know or have our employees aware of the hazards that might be present within our properties, within our organization. We also want to be aware of the type of walk-off mats that should be used, and obviously wet floor signs that coincide with those mats. Footwear, I know footwear policies are big within our insured organization, so we'll talk a little bit of how that impacts your exposure and controls, and also roofs, drains, and icicles. So employee awareness. Essentially, we want to make sure that all of our employees are trained on the following items here. We first and foremost want to make sure that they're recognizing winter slip fall hazards, right? They know that if the lot isn't plowed when they arrive for their shift, that's obviously a hazard. And again, as Chris alluded to, this is something we do maybe take as common sense. But when we're talking about maybe the piling of snow in certain areas, it's important that employees know where those generally should be, because of a potential for refreeze, thaw and refreeze, which again is something they should be knowing, should know to report to the organization. They also need to have issues that prevent parking lot snow removal. So again, Chris had mentioned shift changes for parking in different sections of the lot, depending on the time you arrive, whether you're first shift or second shift. This would be something, again, that they would need to be aware of. Using sidewalks, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, along with the proper footwear and the usage of floor signs, which we'll get into most of these. The big takeaway that I want to make sure that you take a look at your organizations and make sure that you have a process in place for your employees to be able to report these hazards. How are they, if they identify a hazard, how do they go about reporting it? And really what we're looking for is corrective measures need to be made, right? If the organization's management isn't aware, or even the maintenance department isn't aware of the potential hazard that exists, then they can't take steps to implement these corrective actions. But it really starts, again, with how are your employees going to report these hazards, or where are they going to report these hazards? And that could be as simple as a quick 5-minute meeting with your employees, and just asking that question to them to see if they do know the process. For the folks that are actually performing snow removal, as mentioned by Chris, in many places the snow removal is contracted out, but that's typically just the parking lots. Many of the customers that I work with do have a snow removal contractor, but they will not typically do the walkways leading to their facility. So we as an employer do have some skin in the game, and those folks that are involved with any type of snow removal really should be trained on, of course, what that snow removal plan is. Chris put up a map of the different snow piling areas. So if we have an employee that's going to be driving a plow pickup truck throughout our lot, it's essential that they know where those piling areas are. They want to make sure that we actually are using the equipment in accordance with the safety instructions that come with it. So a snow blower, the brush attachments for a tractor, or even a skid steer to remove snow, we need to know that this is something that they are not going to be injured with while working. And also lead by example, right? If we have a footwear and policy in place, we and our supervisors and our snow removal crews, we're no different than our frontline employees. So we need to abide by those policies and procedures. And again, lead by example. Walk-off mats are something, again, that we're not necessarily controlling the exposure on the exterior of our facility by removing the snow, but we're recognizing that employees walking into our facility are going to be tracking in some potential for snow, or eventually some moisture to fall upon our interior walkways. So mats are going to take the place of hopefully controlling that potential hazard or source of a slip trip fall injury. But there are different types, and obviously length considerations and keeping those mats clean and dry are very critical to ensuring their effectiveness in preventing an injury. And so when talking about the two different types of mats, we have either a scraper or a wiper. In winter, both these would be necessary, and I'll get to that right away here with a scraper mat. Essentially, what these mats are for are the first line of defense when employees are walking in with hopefully some winter boots on, and they need to kick off or rub off the accumulated snow and ice that are on their boots. These have the more a grittier surface to it that's going to scrape off those large accumulations. And again, hopefully these mats are kept outdoors, so they're not going to melt eventually and then cause puddling on the floors. The next type of mat that we want to have in place after or following the scraper would be your wiper mat. So this would be, again, something that's going to maybe take off some of the smaller particles of snow or debris that are on our employees' footwear, but then it's also going to act as an absorbent. So it's going to absorb any melting snow or ice and not create any puddling on the floor. This goes into another real life mat mayhem incident that occurred where an employee did arrive to work during a snow event. Scraper mats were placed indoors, and if you remember a few slides ago, scraper mats, we want to keep those outdoors again because they're taking the bulk of that accumulation off the employee's footwear. Therefore, we can assume that it's going to melt and create puddling inside our facility, which is a bad thing. And in this incident, the employee tripped, fracturing a wrist and both forearm bones, requiring surgical repair. Oof, surgical repair. That's not a good term in the insurance world, and you can see $35,000 of total incurred costs for this claim. So a very, very nasty injury, which again, working with maybe your vendors, if you do work with services that maintain and provide your mats in your facility, making sure that they know that the scrapers go outside and the wipers go inside, or just having that conversation can hopefully prevent this. We also want to make sure that we're keeping them clean, right? Routinely inspecting them. So I look at our walk-off mats just like our exterior parking lot inspection logs. This should be a part of maybe that inspection as well, to make sure that if those walk-off mats are become completely soiled or drenched with water or accumulation of snow or ice, that they are addressed, maybe replaced with a fresh one, or somehow dried off, whether it be through fans or some of these fancy absorbent mats that you can see are noted there. 3M brand, that could be an option for you as well. But obviously, they're not going to be effective if we're not inspecting them and maintaining them during these winter weather events. So include that into your inspection process, or as we pointed out, rounding is a term, rounding the facility and looking at those mats should be a regular point of inspection. Wet floor signs, always good to see wet floor signs, right? The problem with wet floor signs is we see them too often, and that's why we have use wet floor signs when floors are wet. R is in bolded and red font. That's there for a reason, because I think Chris would agree with me that on many occasions throughout both of our careers, we walk into facilities that these wet floor signs are out and the floors are as dry, bone dry. So what that does is it basically creates a false sense of security for the employees, or complacency, I guess you could say, where the employees see these wet floor signs day in and day out, knowing that the floor is typically dry and in fact not wet. Therefore, they disregard any type of caution or warning that they're trying to provide. So as we dry our floors and clean our floors, and that's, we can see that obviously we need to remove signage, and so that these actually do provide a warning when conditions are not in fact dry. We also want to keep them in an area that we can get to them pretty easily, but they're not out in the open. So a simple maintenance closet or somewhere behind a door would be good. But we can go to the next one here. Footwear, as I mentioned, many organizations do have footwear policies, but when we're talking about footwear during snow or ice events, the type is obviously very, very important. Obviously, a high heel option wouldn't be something we'd want our employees walking from our parking lot into our main entrance to go to work in. So suggest employees wear winter boots in the parking lot and then change their footwear as they get into the facility would be an option. The pictures you see down in the bottom left-hand corner there are the traction aids that Chris had mentioned before. These are basically devices that you can put on your footwear, boots in this example of the picture, and they have low profile spikes on the bottom of the soles there that provide additional traction when walking on snow or ice. However, just like everything, we need to refer to the manufacturer's instructions on how to safely use these products. Some traction aids do prohibit employees from using these on concrete or flat surfaces because the spikes can actually create a more slipperier condition than if they weren't wearing them at all. There are, however, products out there that are rated for indoor, outdoor, and while driving use, which that driving portion is a big one because I know a lot of our motor carriers have truck drivers that are getting in and out of their cabs from time to time. And what a hassle it would be if they'd have to put these on each and every time they got in and out of their trucks. The other thing too, just to consider, is making sure we have a bench to put their our footwear on. So whether they're changing from their boots to their high heels or putting on their traction aids, a bench can help again that slip, trip, fall potential while just getting on our footwear. Many of our organizations do have larger facilities that, when under these heavy snow events, we have the potential for a roof collapse. So there are times where employees or a contractor may be needed to remove snow to avoid that potential catastrophic property loss. But there is a potential for those employees or contractors to fall. So we need to have our fall protection in place, and obviously under very slippery conditions on these roofs. If we are sending up our own employees or even our contractor to remove snow in these large events, we need to also point out any potential hazards where they could fall through the roof. In this picture, you can see a skylight. However, the cage going around the skylight is manufactured for that fall protection. It's acting as a cover in the event that this snow or a skylight gets covered in snow. It doesn't become buried and it doesn't become a potential hidden hazard for anybody up on the roof. So if you do have skylights in your facilities and you don't have these covers, that may be something to consider. But at the very minimum, employees engaged or contractors engaged in this type of work should be utilizing fall protection. Another real life incident here with a downspout disaster. As you can see from the picture, we have a downspout that's discharging near a doorway. And in this incident, a worker was walking into the facility to start his shift when he slipped on snow or ice. The downspout was discharged directly towards that doorway, like you can see in the picture. And the fall resulted in a 4-night hospital stay with a skull fracture and a severe concussion. Not a good one. And obviously, based on the total incurred cost of $446,000, you can tell this was a very, very nasty injury for this employee. And these are the types of pictures that we as loss control consultants don't like taking. In all honesty, we do not like seeing these types of downspouts creating a skating rink at our insured's facilities. If you look very closely in this picture, there's a green dumpster in the background. And my guess is this is a situation where employees might be working where the doorway might be to the left and they need to take out the garbage that is directly across the path of a skating rink. So what we want to do as far as preventing these types of things from occurring is obviously these should be identified slip, trip, fall hazards and identified through our auditing process of our facilities and our properties. If at all possible, we should be redirecting these downspouts so they aren't directed toward discharge in walkways or doorways. And if not possible to redirect, because I have seen this as not being an option of rerouting our gutters and our downspouts, then we obviously need to treat these more frequently. And again, that goes back to the snow inspection log that we looked at prior to. Just to show you examples, here would be the picture to the left is a downspout discharging directly onto a walkway where employees and potentially customers walk on that surface. And then to the right, you can see a potential solution. So yes, they had to tear up some thin patch of concrete, but they now have that discharging below the walking surface and directly into the storm sewer inlet that you can see. So refreeze, we've mentioned it a few times in this, piling our snow in different areas. If we haven't piled uphill, we also we should be aware that that could create a refreeze situation, especially in late fall and early spring. When the sun's beating down, the ice and snow will melt, and then at night it'll freeze up and maybe make it very difficult for our third shifters to come into work. So again, these are areas that should be looked into and discussed with your snow removal contractor. Not only that, but any type of architects or designers, if we're making any additions to our property or alterations to the property, this should be a point of discussion as far as drainage, and even take into consideration, okay, so we've extended our lots and we've put a shed on this side of the lot, and that's where we used to pile our snow. Where should we put our snow moving forward? So these are all things that we should be thinking of when designing and again planning for any alterations of our lot or property through renovations or alterations. Chris had alluded to this again, to the ad hoc path. So employees love to take the shortest route or shortest path possible to get to and from their cars when they're starting their shift. And you can see in these two pictures are great examples of this. The picture to the left shows a pathway through a snow covered likely grassy area in the summer, but not snow covered in the winter, where it's been compacted and it looks almost like a stretch of ice at this point. To the right, you can see the contractor paving this walkway obviously had to reroute it due to a utility vault that it looks like was in the way. And so does anybody follow the walkway? Absolutely not. They go the shortest path, which again, if this was a snow covered surface, could be a potential slip trip fall. In your parking areas, I know parking lot islands and medians and ditch lines. If you look during the winter and start to see any of these paths that you see in that left-hand picture, that would be time to have a conversation with your employees on taking the safest path in and out of the facility. Another real life incident with a porta potty problem. This is directed to our folks in the construction industry, where we had a worker that was on a job site and needed to go use the porta potty, and might have been maybe a little bit of an emergent situation for this employee, because they took a shortcut down a snow covered bankment. This resulted in that employee slipping and falling down the embankment and injuries to the shoulder and right wrist. This was over a $500,000 claim. Again, just for a shortcut. We talked about the shortest path in the previous few slides. This is an example of that out on our job site. So what do we want to do? Construction job sites aren't on a different island here. They're similar to our manufacturers, our warehouses, our healthcare insureds. They need to develop a snow removal procedure specific to every site. And obviously, there's a lot of challenges to that. The grading of the site around the building that's being constructed, and what type of surface is it? Gravel? When is it going to be paved? Obviously, that takes a lot of planning for. And so we still want to inspect our walkways. And when we're talking about walkways with high foot traffic on a job site, obviously the porta potties in the example we just covered would be one example of that. But job trailers, dumpsters, as you can see in the picture to the left, here's a job site where an employee walked to this dumpster with a box full of debris, and I don't see any clearing anywhere. And to make matters worse, they're climbing onto the dumpster with likely snow covered boots that could easily result in a fall injury. So, and don't sleep on the heavy equipment and aerial lifts for our operators out there. They are exposed to every time they get into and out of their cabs of their equipment. They have the potential for snow and ice covered handles, steps, and things like that that should be addressed. Another real life hidden hazard is an employee arrived to their shift at 5:30 in the dark of night. Main parking lot was cleared. However, the roof melt had drained into the walkway, and the employee did not see it and slipped, fracturing their hip. Another heavy hitter here at $178,000 of total incurred costs. So even though we did have the lot cleared, we had the roof melt, creating that slippery surface that the employee likely overlooked and resulted in that. So what we're talking about as far as hidden hazards are, the picture to the left is a good example of that. Here we have a storm sewer grate that is missing a big chunk in it. Now imagine if we had a few inches of snow fall around, prior to this picture being taken. It could have easily been covered with that snow accumulation, and for somebody to step in it is very likely, especially if it's a walkway or a high foot traffic area. So these are all types of hazards that we need to really be planning for. And what I mean by planning is essentially getting into our facility, our properties, and doing regular walkarounds. And the things we need to be looking at are any changes in elevation, right? We have a joint for a concrete walkway where one slab is a half inch or 2 inches higher than the other slab it's adjacent to. This is obviously a change in elevation that would be buried under snow or ice and could result in a slip, trip, fall. Any large gaps or broken, cracked concrete or cement. Loose or damaged grates, as you can see in the picture in the bottom right, that would be a grate or a cover that is obviously loose, damaged, and could easily be overlooked if we had a snow event around the time this occurred. So finishing up the webinar here today, this is the last few slides that we have, but just to kind of summarize what we went through. Obviously, with advanced planning, you can help to create a safe work environment. And as those previous slides just mentioned, those hidden hazards, those don't need to be identified in the middle of winter, because in all honesty, they might not be able to be identified because those areas could be snow or ice covered. It starts maybe even in the summer. Start looking at those areas, the conditions of the lot, the walkways, because if you identify them, it's likely going to take time to make those repairs. So plan. Follow through with your snow removal. Obviously, we have the maps, we have the inspection logs, we have all those things in place, the employee awareness. We need to make sure we're acting on it. And prior to the winter season is when we should be doing that. Routine inspections during snow or ice, and again, documenting in the log that we looked at. And then be prepared for other issues that create hazards in winter. Obviously, working in the cold, the potential for hypothermia, especially if we have employees that are out on foot shoveling walkways. Make sure that they're wearing enough clothing, winter jackets, boots, and frostbite gloves and socks to make sure that those other hazards aren't something they are exposed to. The last thing I will mention, again, I remind you of, is the Argent winter weather awareness slip, trip, fall prevention website that has the link there. It will be in our handouts that, again, you can obtain through the file button in the bottom right hand of your screen. I believe it's going to be in this presentation. You can simply copy and paste it from there, or you can always reach out to your appointed loss control consultant with West Bend Mutual Insurance Argent, and they would be happy to provide this link to you where all of our resources, posters, window clings, and stickers for ice melt containers can all be obtained. So with that, I will open it up to questions that, again, in the bottom right hand of your screen, there should be a chat button where you can type in any questions you may have. I'll leave it open for the next few minutes here. I do see, and this was a while ago, so I apologize, Barbara, but it looked like you did have a question. What if it's still snowing or blowing? And I didn't grab in what portion of the slideshow that question was posed. So if you have any additional information you can provide with your question, I'd be happy to answer it. And anybody else who has any questions. So James Dorn has posed a question. If you find irregular areas and broken concrete during the snow season on site, you plow or shovel, how should you address that? What I would say is, obviously, given the winter season, it's a difficult time to do any major concrete repairs or any type of repaving. So obviously, we would want to identify those areas as being problem areas. Chris had the slide which showed the map of the snow removal, the snow piling. I would mark those areas if they can't be repaired first and foremost. So we've contacted a masonry contractor to make the repairs. If they're unable to do so due to the weather conditions, certainly mark those areas on your snow removal map, and then look for maybe temporary band-aid types of fixes. Whether it be a quick cold patch of asphalt in those areas. It might be an eyesore, I realize that, but might be preventing a slip, trip, fall injury down the road until those repairs could be made. Chris, if you want to jump in, if you have any response to that question too, feel free.
Yeah, hey, thanks for that question, James. One thing that I would suggest, if, like Derek said, that it's just not going to be possible to get that area fixed, I would possibly highlight that with some orange fluorescent spray paint. A lot of it you can find at any hardware store, such as a landscaping marking paint. And then that way those areas can be marked, which is really important, because not only if you save it on the map and plan on address it later in the spring, it's really important so that people can see it, even after the snow's gone. It could still be a trip hazard. And would a cone be acceptable if it's a small grate? I would think as long as that cone would be left in that area to mark the hazard. The only concern I would have is if that would get moved by someone and or taken, and then would that hazard be left exposed again? Any thoughts on that one, Derek?
Yeah, no, I would agree with Chris's concerns too, that the cone, yes, it does provide some awareness barrier to that grate. But in all honesty, I try to use the hierarchy of controls. So in an event like that, where we have an opening in our grade that could cause a slip, trip, fall hazard, is there a way we could maybe put steel plating over it? You might see that on a lot of construction sites where there's open manholes and things like that. As a temporary fix, they cover that fall hazard so we don't have a fall exposure. Great question though, James.
And real quickly, I think what maybe Barbara was alluding to with the snowing or blowing, what should we be doing during those events? Because there's going to be periods where it's snowing really heavy and you just can't keep up. So sometimes you're going to have to suspend your efforts. And during those times, it's really important to ensure staff have the proper footwear. When possible, maybe they could do ride sharing, or if they have a family member that could come pick them up or drop them off, reduce that traffic in the lot. That's really helpful. Anything, maybe even if you have overnight rooms available where people could stay so that they don't have to travel on the roads, and they can just be there for the next day, get dressed, and you can feed them at the facility. That's another alternative. Just whatever we can do to get through that, especially during blizzard conditions. We definitely want to keep people off the road as much as we can. So that was a great question too, Barbara. Thank you.